My name is Marin Ashworth. I'm 31 years old, and 4 weeks ago, my sister Dana stood in the lobby of Crescent Valley Credit Union and told a loan officer named Patricia that I wasn't really family, not in any way that matters legally. She said it loud enough for the next 3 people in line to hear. She didn't know I was the one who'd cleared every single loan our family had taken out for the last 6 years. I found out about that conversation the same afternoon from Patricia herself, who called me at my desk because she recognized my name on the file and thought something felt wrong. To understand why my hands didn't shake when I picked up that phone, you need to go back 5 years, to the year I stopped being invited to Thanksgiving and started being the person my family called at 11 at night when the bank said no to everyone else. Before I get into that, hit like and subscribe if you're new here. It genuinely helps this story reach more people. Drop the word family in the comments if you've ever been the one who fixed everything and got none of the credit. I read every comment. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense until you understand what I actually do for a living. I've worked in consumer lending for 9 years. Right now, I'm a senior underwriter at First Meridian Bank, 40 minutes from the small town of Ashworth Falls, Ohio, where I grew up and where my parents and my sister Dana still live. Underwriting is not a glamorous job. Most days I read financial statements, debt to income ratios, tax returns, and credit histories, and I decide whether a loan is safe enough for the bank to approve. It's detail work. It's the kind of work nobody notices unless something goes wrong. I mention this now because my family has spent a decade treating my job like a punchline. My father used to introduce me at church potlucks as our numbers girl, like I counted paperclips for a living. My mother told her book club I did something with spreadsheets. Dana, 2 years younger than me, went into event planning and became, in my parents' eyes, the interesting one, the one with a personality, the one who threw parties people remembered. I was the quiet one who moved out at 22 and never really moved back in, even when I visited. I didn't think much of the jokes for a long time. I told myself it was harmless, the way families tease the sibling who picked the boring career. What I didn't realize was that boring was doing a lot of work in that house, because while everyone laughed about my spreadsheets, they were also quietly relying on them. Growing up, the division of labor in our house was never spoken out loud, but it was clear enough. Dana got the school plays, the birthday parties with themes, the college fun conversations at the dinner table where my parents debated out loud, in front of both of us, how to make her dreams work financially. I got asked at 14 to help my father balance the store's checkbook one summer because I was good with that kind of thing. And somewhere in that ordinary, unremarkable request, a role got assigned to me that I never consciously agreed to and never really got to leave. By 16, I was doing my parents' informal budgeting every month. By college, I was the one who caught it when my father's supplier overcharged him 2 years running. Nobody called it a job. Nobody called it anything. It was just Marin being Marin, quiet and careful, good with numbers, the reliable one. I don't think my parents did this out of cruelty. I think it's simpler and sadder than that. I think it's just easier to notice the child who performs joy loudly than the one who performs competence quietly. And over enough years, that difference in noticing hardens into a difference in worth, even when nobody meant for it to. It started 6 years ago. In the spring, my father's hardware store, Ashworth Supply, needed a $40,000 inventory loan to survive a bad season. He came to me first, not the bank, sitting at my kitchen table with a folder of receipts he didn't fully understand. I didn't lend him money myself. I've never had that kind of money, but I sat with him for 6 hours, restructured his cash flow statement so it actually reflected the seasonal nature of hardware sales, and walked him through exactly what a loan officer would need to see to approve it. He got the loan. He never once mentioned at any family dinner afterward that I was the reason, 2 years later, it was Dana. Her event planning business needed a $65,000 loan to lease a permanent venue space. Her debt-to-income ratio was a mess, inconsistent income, 2 maxed credit cards, a car loan she'd forgotten to list. She called me crying, not because she wanted my help exactly, but because my mother had told her I knew people at the bank and could put in a good word. I didn't put in a good word. Good words don't approve loans. What I did was spend a weekend rebuilding her business plan into something a credit committee could actually read, showing seasonality patterns that explained the inconsistent income and signing nothing, because I told her clearly I wasn't going to put my own credit on the line. She got the loan on her own merits, once her paperwork actually told the truth about her business. She thanked me once in a text message and then never brought it up again. 3 years ago, my parents refinanced their house to cover my mother's knee surgery. I found the error in their original mortgage paperwork, a miscalculated escrow account that had been quietly overcharging them for 4 years, and I'm the one who caught it, documented it, and got them a credit toward the refinance that saved them almost $11,000 over the life of the loan. My father said, "Good thing you're good with numbers, Marin Bear," and then asked me to pass the potatoes. I want to be honest about something. I didn't do any of this expecting a parade. I did it because I loved them, and because I was good at it, and because it felt like the one language I could speak fluently in a family that otherwise found me a little flat, a little quiet, a little hard to talk to at parties. Numbers were how I showed up. I just didn't realize until 4 weeks ago that showing up quietly for 6 years had made me invisible. The trouble started with Dana's wedding. Not her actual wedding. She got married 3 years ago. A small courthouse thing I helped pay for without being asked to, and never brought up. This was about her 10th anniversary vow renewal, which she'd decided to throw as a full event at the same venue space I'd helped her finance 6 years earlier. She was inviting 120 people. My mother was thrilled. My father was already talking about giving a toast. I got a text in February that said, "Hey, so this is kind of just immediate family plus close friends. And honestly, Mom thinks it should stay small on our side. No offense." I asked what that meant exactly. Dana called me, not texted, called, which should have told me something, and said carefully, like she'd rehearsed it, "Marin, it's not that we don't love you. It's just, you're not really a big part of my day-to-day life, you know. Mom and Dad and I talk every week. You're kind of separate. I don't want it to be weird." I sat with that for a long time after I hung up. Separate? That was the word she used. I thought about 6 years of kitchen table spreadsheets, about the escrow error, about the Saturday I spent rebuilding her loan file instead of doing literally anything else with my weekend. None of that had made me less separate. If anything, I think it had let them stop noticing me entirely, because I never needed anything back. I didn't fight with her. I said okay, and I meant it more than I expected to. I told myself I was fine. I mostly was. What I didn't expect was the loan. In late May, Dana and her husband Colin applied for a $28,000 loan to cover the vow renewal, and, buried in the application, a down payment on a second event venue location they wanted to open under the same business whose original financing I'd rebuilt 6 years earlier. The loan went through the exact same institution, First Meridian's retail partner, Crescent Valley Credit Union, where I don't work, but where my bank has an underwriting support relationship for exactly this kind of small business file. Patricia, the loan officer at Crescent Valley, has worked with me on joint files for 3 years. She knows my name. She knows what I do. Dana's application had a problem. Her current year's business income showed a dip, nothing catastrophic, just enough to trip the automated ratio check, and Patricia needed a letter of financial support or a qualified co-signer to get it through committee without a manual override that would take weeks. Dana mentioned, apparently, that her sister worked in banking and could probably vouch for the business. Patricia, trying to be helpful, asked exactly that could Maren Ashworth, listed as your sister on your original 2020 application file, provide a letter of support given her banking background and prior involvement in restructuring this business's original loan documentation. I wasn't in the room for what happened next, but Patricia told me almost word for word 2 hours later because it bothered her enough to call me directly. Dana said, she's not really involved in the business side of things. She's not really, she's my sister technically, but we're not close. I don't think she'd want to be listed on anything. Patricia, a little confused, pulled up the original file to double-check, because she remembered my name from the restructuring documents 6 years earlier. She said, I have notes here that Maren Ashworth worked directly on the cash flow restatement for this business in 2020. Is that not accurate? And Dana said the thing that ended up in my voicemail 2 hours later, verbatim, because Patricia felt strange enough about it to repeat it to me exactly. She said, I guess she helped with some paperwork once, but she's not really family in any way that matters legally. We don't have any financial relationship. I'd rather not have her name on anything. Not really family in any way that matters legally. Patricia called me that afternoon, a little apologetic, mostly just confused, because from where she sat, my name was all over the historical file for a business that was now, 6 years later, being described by its own owner as something I had no real connection to. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, Patricia said, but I wanted to check with you directly before I close out the file. Are you and your sister estranged because your name is attached to the original 2020 credit memo as a contributing party, and I want to make sure I'm not missing a conflict of interest on our end before we move forward. I sat at my desk for a moment. I looked at the calendar on my wall, at the framed certificate from my 9 years in the industry, at the quiet, ordinary Tuesday it had otherwise been. I said, no conflict of interest, Patricia. I'm not on the loan. I was never on the loan. I just did the underlying work that got the first one approved. Patricia said, that's what the file shows. I just wanted to be transparent with you since your name's attached to the history. I asked her one question. I said, can I see the current application? Not to interfere. Just to understand what's actually being represented. She sent it to me 20 minutes later, because interinstitution underwriters share these things more casually than most people realize, especially when there's a professional relationship involved and no conflict of interest on the record. I read every page. The business income statement Dana had submitted for this application used the same seasonal restatement methodology I'd built for her in 2020. The exact formatting, the exact adjustment, categories, the exact language in the notes column, word for word, copied from a template I'd personally created and emailed her 6 years earlier. She hadn't just used my work. She'd used my work while telling the bank, on the same afternoon, that I wasn't really family in any way that mattered. I didn't call her that night. I sat with it. I want to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't rage exactly. It was something quieter and colder. The feeling of watching a structure you built with your own hands get used as a foundation by someone who's simultaneously telling everyone the foundation isn't really there. I called Patricia back the next morning. I asked her carefully, professionally, whether the current application would still qualify without a letter of support, purely on its own financial merits, if the income dip were addressed some other way. She said possibly if the year-over-year trend gets explained with documentation. Right now it's borderline. Committee's going to want something. I said, understood. Thank you for being straightforward with me. I hung up, and I made a decision I want to be honest about, because I think it says something true about who I am. I didn't sabotage the loan. I didn't call anyone to interfere. I've spent 9 years building a reputation in this industry on the idea that underwriting is supposed to be honest, not personal, and I wasn't going to break that principle over a wounded feeling, even a real one. What I did instead was simpler and I think more permanent. I sent Dana an email, not a call. Not a text, an email, because I wanted a record, and because some part of me already knew I needed one. I wrote, Dana, Patricia at Crescent Valley reached out to me yesterday about your current loan application. Since my name is attached to the original 2020 credit file as a contributing party, she mentioned you told her I'm not really family in any way that matters legally, and that you'd rather not have my name on anything. I want to respect that completely going forward. Please note that I will no longer be available to provide financial documentation support, restructuring work, or informal underwriting guidance for any future applications tied to your business, our parents' finances, or any other family matter. I wish you the best with the loan committee. I attached one thing to that email, a PDF of the original 2020 cash flow restatement template, the one whose formatting and language had been copied verbatim into her current application, with the file's creation date and my name in the document properties, exactly as it had existed on my work computer for 6 years. I didn't send it as a threat. I sent it because I think some part of me needed her, and everyone else, to see in writing what 6 years of just some paperwork had actually looked like. She called me 40 minutes after I sent it. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was 11 seconds long. She said, Maren, what is this? Call me back, in a voice that had none of the softness from February's phone call left in it. I didn't call back that day. I went to work. I underwrote 4 unrelated loans, all for strangers, all more straightforward than anything happening in my own family. And I drove home and made dinner and didn't think about it until my phone rang again that evening. This time it was my mother. Maren, what on earth is going on? Dana is a wreck. She said you sent her some kind of legal document. I said I sent her an email. It's not a legal document. It's a template I created for her business 6 years ago, which she used again this year without asking. On the same day, she told a loan officer, I'm not really family in any way that matters. There was a long pause. My mother said, I'm sure that's not what she meant. I said, I have it almost word for word from Patricia. I'm not guessing. My mother's voice shifted into the tone she uses when she's trying to manage a situation rather than actually hear it. Maren, you have to understand. Dana's under a lot of stress with the venue and the anniversary event, and you know how she gets when she's stressed. She probably just wasn't thinking. I said, Mom, I've done 6 years of work for this family without asking for anything back. I'm not asking for anything now either. I'm just done being the invisible part of the paperwork. She said, you're being dramatic. I said, I know that's what it looks like from where you're standing. I'm going to let you go now. I hung up. I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd spent that 6-hour Saturday 5 years earlier rebuilding my father's inventory numbers, and I felt, for the first time and longer than I could remember, completely calm. The loan committee met 8 days later. I know this only because Patricia mentioned it in passing on an unrelated call, not because Dana told me anything. The application, without a letter of support and without an adequately documented explanation for the income dip, went to manual review and was denied. Not because I did anything, because the numbers, without the specific kind of careful, invisible work I'd been doing for 6 years, simply didn't hold up on their own in front of a committee that had never met Dana and had no reason to extend her any grace. I found out about the denial from my father, who called me 2 weeks after the first phone call, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. He said, Dana's loan didn't go through. She says the bank made some kind of mistake. I said, it wasn't a mistake, Dad. The application didn't meet the standard on its own numbers. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that surprised me. He said, you used to fix things like that for her, for all of us. I said I did, for 6 years, and 4 weeks ago she told the bank I wasn't really family in any way that mattered. I believed her, Dad. I'm just believing her a little more slowly than she expected. He didn't have an answer for that. He said he had to go check on dinner, and the call ended. Colin, Dana's husband, called me 3 days after that, which surprised me more than almost anything else in this whole story. Colin and I have never been close, pleasant at holidays, nothing deeper, and he'd never once called me on his own before. He said, Marin, I want to be upfront. Dana doesn't know I'm calling. I said, okay. He said, I saw the email, the one with the attachment. I want you to know I didn't know she'd reused your template without asking. I assumed, this whole time, that the business paperwork was something she'd built herself with maybe some general advice from you. I didn't realize how much of it was actually yours. I didn't say anything right away. He kept going. He said, I run the operations side of the venue business. I should have looked more closely at where the numbers came from. I didn't. That's on me too. I said, I appreciate you saying that. He said, for what it's worth, I think what she said to that loan officer was wrong, and I told her so. She's not ready to hear it from me the way she needs to. I don't know if she'll ever be ready to hear it from you, but I wanted you to know that at least one person in this family actually understands what you did, and what it cost you to stop doing it. I asked him carefully how the business was doing without the expansion loan. He was honest, which I respected. He said cash flow was tighter than they'd hoped, that they'd shelved the second venue idea indefinitely, and that they were rebuilding the current year's financials from scratch, this time with an actual bookkeeper they were paying, because, in his words, apparently that was always supposed to be a paid position, not a favor. I told him I was glad to hear they'd hired someone properly. I meant it. I didn't offer to help. He didn't ask me to. We ended the call on decent terms, better terms than I'd had with anyone else in the family in 6 weeks, and I sat with that for a while after I hung up, turning it over. It was strange, realizing the most honest conversation to come out of all of this was with the person I'd always considered the most peripheral. The vow renewal happened anyway, scaled down, at a smaller venue than the one Dana had wanted to expand into. I wasn't invited, which by that point didn't surprise me, and I'll be honest, didn't hurt the way it would have 4 weeks earlier. I saw photos on my mother's phone the next time I visited. Dana in a pale blue dress, my parents beaming beside her, 120 chairs that photos suggested were closer to 70. Nobody mentioned the loan. Nobody mentioned my email. It sat in the family the way certain things do, unspoken but perfectly understood by everyone. 6 weeks have passed since that first phone call from Patricia. I still work the same job, underwrite the same kinds of files, sit at the same desk with the same framed certificate on the wall. I haven't spoken to Dana since the 11-second voicemail. My mother has called twice, both times to ask, in a roundabout way, whether I'd reconsider helping your sister out, just this once, for the family. I told her, both times, that I would reconsider the moment somebody in this family called me family without a legal qualifier attached to it. My father is the one who's surprised me most. He came by 2 weeks ago, unannounced, sat at my kitchen table, the same table, and asked me, plainly, to help him understand what an escrow account actually was, and why it had taken me finding an error to save him $11,000 3 years ago, instead of him ever asking how it worked. I spent 2 hours walking him through it, not because I owed him anything, but because he asked, directly, like I was a person worth asking rather than a resource to be assumed. It felt different. I noticed the difference. I think about Dana sometimes, and I want to be honest about what I feel, because it isn't hatred. I think she grew up in a family that made being interesting and visible the currency that mattered. And somewhere along the way, she genuinely stopped being able to see the quieter kind of contribution as real, even when she was standing on top of it. I don't think she meant to be cruel in that credit union lobby. I think she meant exactly what she said, which is in some ways worse, because it means for 6 years she'd already decided what I was worth, and I only found out by accident, through a loan officer who happened to be more careful with the truth than my own sister was. If you're watching this and you've spent years being the reliable one, the quiet one, the one who fixes things without being asked and gets thanked with silence, I want you to hear something. Being useful is not the same as being valued. You can find that out the hard way, the way I did, standing in your own kitchen, finding out secondhand what your family really thinks you are. Or you can decide on your own terms, before anyone forces the question, that your name deserves to mean something, even in rooms you're not standing in. I don't know if Dana and I will ever talk again the way we used to, back when I thought not close just meant different personalities, not different value. Some part of me hopes we do, eventually, on terms that don't require me to disappear into the paperwork to be worth including. Some part of me has also made peace with the possibility that we won't. And I've noticed in these 6 quiet weeks that peace doesn't feel like losing. It feels a little bit like finally being allowed to put something down I'd been carrying so long, I'd forgotten it had weight at all. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments about a time your family took your help for granted. And if you want more stories like this one, hit subscribe. New stories go up every week here on The Quiet Reckoning. There's another one waiting for you, about a man who spent 15 years paying his brother's rent in silence, and the one spreadsheet that finally made everyone ask why.